And I think that's an important thing to think about. Like what you see in your ER, wherever you are, the problem is bigger. It's more universal. It's systemic. It's not just you. And I think learning new ways about acquiring, processing, synthesizing information makes you see that, right? It allows you to look at the systems in which you function and understand how to affect change. But I think the questions that people need to think about if they're thinking like, okay, I feel like I want to go back to school, right? The first thing that they have to ask themselves really is what kind of problems do you want to solve?
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. This is where we share stories for inspiration, entertainment, and encouragement, because we all know emergency nurses have the best stories. Now here's your host, Kevin McFarland.
Hey everybody, Kevin McFarland here from the Art of Emergency Nursing, and welcome back to the podcast. Super glad you're here. As always, I have to remind you to leave a rating and review for this podcast. That is what's going to help people like you find a podcast like this. It's one of the best things you can do for the show, so I really appreciate that if you would just take the time and go ahead and do that. Somebody pointed out to me recently that it had been far too long since I've had Dr. Lisa Wolf, your favorite researcher, on the podcast. And you're absolutely right. It has been far too long. And in this episode, we're going to tackle something. It's a question that I get asked frequently and a question that I've referred people to Dr. Wolf to answer this question as well. And that is, what do I go to school for? Maybe you're a nursing student. You're trying to figure out whether or not you need to go back to school. Are you an ADN trying to figure out if you want to go get a BSN? Are you a BSN trying to decide if you want to get a master's? Or are you like me, someone with a master's, trying to decide whether or not you want to go get a doctorate degree? Whatever you are, we've got you covered in this podcast. We are going to talk about all the different degrees, when you should go, when you should not go, and what are some of the things you should consider when you're looking at what degree is going to be your terminal nursing degree. You are going to love this episode with my friend, Dr. Wolf. Oh, geez, I almost forgot. The opinions and views on this podcast belong to me and Dr. Wolf alone and don't necessarily represent our employers, our organizations, or anybody else for that matter. But what more do you need? Enjoy this episode. Let's talk a little bit about continuing education, because this is something that a lot of our listeners are kind of struggling with in a lot of different ways. Like, do you go back to school at whatever level you came into nursing, do you then pursue the next level? And I'll kind of preface this by saying I came in as an ADN student or as an ADN nurse. And when I finished my ADN, I was like, I'm not going back for my bachelor's. I don't need it. And then, of course, went back for my bachelor's and I said, I'm not going for my master's. I don't need it. And then, of course, got my master's. Mm-hmm. And then now kind of kick around every now and then and say, oh, do I want to go get my doctorate? And so far have done, fought off that feeling. But, a lot of people are asking those questions and then kind of what do they want to do with that? So help us kind of think that through and talk that through.
Yeah, this is I think a real problem for nursing, because I think we don't give people enough real information, right, in this decision-making process. So by way of full disclosure, the joke with my partner is that I have more degrees than he has ex-girlfriends. So so I hope we don't break up, because then I'm going to have to go get another degree. But I have an undergraduate degree in anthropology and medieval literature.
No, you do not.
I have a master's degree in creative writing. I have a diploma in nursing.
I did not know that.
I have a diploma, yeah. Because I couldn't get into any of those 3-year master's programs that they were starting in the early 90s, the mid 90s, right? The 3-year RN to MSN or NP or whatever, right? So those programs took 4 people. And I was like, oh, I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. Of course they'll take me. I'm smart. And they didn't. So I was like, all right, well, I really want to be a nurse. So there was a diploma program up the block. So I went to that. And it was fine because
if anyone would have asked me ever if you were a diploma nurse, my guess would have been absolutely not. Like
I know, right? So I was being practical. Like I wanted to be a nurse. So and that was the thing that was available to me. I don't think I knew about community college programs per se, right? So and there was this great hospital program like literally up the block. And I am all about convenience. I could walk to school. So, and the school building itself, it used to be an old monastery, St. Elizabeth's Hospital School of Nursing. And so the students used to live in the old monastery. And then the hospital was literally like across the quad. So you would be working in the hospital all the time. So it was a really clinically heavy program. And I had all the liberal arts stuff that kind of helped me.
Right, just jump right in.
Right, just jump right in, right? So then I did a master's degree with like a bridge. I had to take research and like a role delineation kind of course and statistics. I'd never taken a stats course before, which is really ironic considering what I do now for a living, right? So that was my first stats course.
And then that bridged your master's degree
to my master's degree, right?
Now, what was your first master's degree in?
Creative writing.
Oh, okay.
I'm a playwright. I have a degree in playwriting.
But I'm seeing what I'm seeing that everyone who doesn't know you may not realize. Like you can see where this has kind of created Dr. Lisa Wolf. I mean,
right, exactly. So I have an undergraduate degree in anthropology, right? So that's kind of what I do.
What are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that? Not super practical, probably.
It actually is really practical because I study nursing environments. I'm an anthropologist who studies nursing environments.
Oh, well.
Right? I do ethnography, basically.
Right. Okay, I was wrong.
Yeah, it all comes together. And then I got my PhD from Boston College in nursing. So, so spread over the course of, mumble number of years. So I've been in school for basically my entire life. I love school. I really do. I can't wait to get another degree. Like I'm going to go get a degree in Renaissance studies.
What else is there? I mean, is there like the super duper master's degree?
No, I would get it in something else. Like I have huge gaps in my education. I feel like I want a degree in art history or Renaissance literature or something.
Not super marketable, just saying. But
I know, but I don't need to be marketable anymore. I'm old, right? I'm done. I'm going to go have fun. Maybe I'll learn how to speak Japanese or something.
Yeah.
So, in any case, so like this idea of, I think for nurses, the problem is that we have these multiple entry points, right? Educationally speaking. Mm-hmm. So there's the diploma, which I have, which is very clinically focused. I don't even know. There's probably a handful of diploma programs left in the country, right?
Yeah, not many.
But very clinically focused, very, I was in clinical like 3 days a week. Like we had 24 hours of clinic. I mean, we were kick-ass clinicians by the time we graduated. And I remember working on the floor, like when I was a senior, we had to take the floor for a day, like be in charge. And some Boston College student, like BC was down the road, some Boston College student like had no idea what they were doing. And they were a senior also, right? They had no idea what they were doing. So, there are these multiple entry points, right? So we have the diploma, we have the associate degree program, and we have a baccalaureate. There's also really a master's entry level, but that's, not something I want to talk about right away. So we've got the problem, I think, is that if we consider nursing a series of tasks, right, then diploma education and associate degree education and it's all the same, right? If all we're doing is carrying out orders and doing tasks, right?
Sure.
But that's not what we do, right? That's not what nurses do. There's so much more to this. And I was having a conversation with some nurses that I work with. There was actually a lull in the ED on Sunday morning.
Oh, don't say that too loud.
So people were asking me like, oh, hey, you teach, what do you think about this? And they were saying like, they couldn't understand, like they wanted to further, they were associate degree nurses who wanted to get their bachelor's. And they were like, but we have to take these liberal arts courses. And I was like, of course you do. And they were like, but why? And I was like, okay, so here's why. Because nursing is about recognizing, identifying and mitigating suffering, right? And they're like, oh yeah, absolutely. I'm like, so here's the thing. Suffering is not a clinical concept. We only know about suffering from art and poetry and music and literature and religion, right? And having an understanding of those disciplines or those subjects really informs how we can understand what's going on with our patients, right? So if you study religion, or take a religion course, one person said to me, well, I go to church, like I know about religion. I'm like, you know about your religion? Like there's a whole bunch of other ones, right? Like this whole idea that like there's this whole world of people who think differently, right? And how they think about illness and wellness and death and dying and all those things. Like it's important to have a basic understanding of how other people think about these things, right? And that's what we learn through liberal arts courses, right? And so that's why I really feel like if you don't have a bachelor's degree yet, like it really serves you well as a clinician to get that education, right? To finish that degree. I
guess I never really thought of it that way. And that, a lot of that is going to be a lot of those courses are how you're going to, I mean, they broaden your scope of knowledge for sure. Like that's right. What they're designed to do. Exactly. I guess I just never really thought about that that way.
I think I've been thinking about it a lot as I have discussions with people who are trying to develop programs in the context of liberal arts colleges, right? And I was like, well, of course you would do that. And this is how, like I gave a talk at a local university, like how does nursing fit into liberal arts? And I think the things that we can learn from those other subjects, right? Like are very important to inform us about the human condition. And true. That's what sets nursing apart from other disciplines, right? Is we treat people. And so we have to understand people. So we have to take anthropology and sociology and religion and art to really understand how other people see the world, right? Because that helps us do our work better.
Because depending on your situation, if you have depending on where you are and how diverse your neighborhood, your friend circle, your family circle, depending on how diverse those things are, like some people never really get introduced to other cultures, other things.
Right. Or even different perspectives.
Yeah. Or even different. Yeah, you're right. Even a different perspective. And you end up with this for example, for a while when I first moved to Houston, I worked with mostly African-American women. Mm-hmm. And there are certain things that like, I just didn't, like, I couldn't relate to it. Like I was just, I got nothing for that conversation. I just don't know. And education will help broaden that.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no such thing as wasted education. But in terms of like people who are like, well, how is that going to make me a better nurse? Like that's how it's going to make you a better nurse because it's going to broaden your perspective. And it's also going to give you different ways of solving problems, like different approaches. And then, so in that sense, like, do I think a baccalaureate is necessary for entry level? Ideally, probably. But I also think that people who are really great clinicians at the associate degree level, I really like this sort of degree +5 or degree +4 idea where like, yeah, you can start to practice with an associate's, but then you should really finish your bachelor's within 5 years. And I think that that we as a healthcare environment, like as a community, we should be supporting that and we should be paying for that, to be honest, right? I think hospitals should be paying for their nurses to complete their bachelor's education.
And many do.
And many do, right, exactly. There's a lot of partnerships between like local colleges and universities. And because what happens is they use those places as clinical sites. And in return, they offer the nurses, like that's what we did in our DEU. We offered our preceptors the opportunity to complete their bachelor's.
Nice.
And I think that's a good like university hospital kind of partnership thing. But then I think people really start thinking about, okay, so I have my bachelor's degree. Great. Now what? Right? And so there are two things that I think are important to consider. One is that I think that we are somehow taught that the farther away from the bedside you get, the better a nurse, like the better it is. And I would argue that that's really not true at all.
No, not necessarily the case. I know lots of very happy nurses who are very happy at the bedside. And I know, and I know lots of unhappy nurses at the bedside, just like I know lots of happy nurses in a boardroom and people who are unhappy in a boardroom.
Right. So like your distance from the bedside really doesn't dictate, or define, the type of nurse you are. But I think also with that, like I have a PhD and I practice at the bedside as a staff nurse.
That's kind of cool.
It is cool. It's very cool because it's an existential exercise, really, because like the more you know, the crazier it is to kind of like try to address sort of like one problem, there's all these other problems that you have to deal with. But I think the questions that people need to think about if they're thinking like, okay, I feel like I want to go back to school, right? The first thing that they have to ask themselves really is, what kind of problems do you want to solve?
I was just going to say that's one of the questions I remember you saying at one point when I think it may have been when we were talking about degrees and I was kind of asking for your opinion. But I remember you asking just that question, like, what do you want to solve? Like, what do you want to do? And I think that's a question that people don't ask themselves early enough that, they can be like, well, then what?
Right. So if you love to teach, you should get a master's in education. Right? I mean, that's the education that you need. It's measurement and evaluation. It's pedagogy. It's how do you plan a class? It's how do you evaluate? That's the education you need to be a nurse educator, right? If you want to be a clinician, then I think we run into some big problems here, because I think the DNP is kind of a problematic degree. And I say that as a professor in a DNP program, because most of my students are like, I don't want to learn this stuff. I want to just be a nurse practitioner, right? So it's 2021 now, right? I think it's going to be, DNPs are going to be required for advanced practice nurses by 2025. So like sneak in there, guys, like get that degree as soon as you can. I think the problems with the DNP for people who want to be clinicians is that there is a real emphasis on systems thinking. And this idea that the DNP will be doing all of this translational research and evidence-based practice and stuff like that. And whereas evidence-based practice is critical to the work of advanced practice nurses, a lot of them just want to be clinicians. Like they want to work in a primary care practice or in an ER or in a women's health, right? They don't want to be doing systems level work. They want to be doing patient focused work. And the DNP kind of forces them to do stuff that they're not particularly interested in.
Yeah.
So I tell people, if you hate reading and if you hate writing papers, don't go to graduate school, because that's all graduate school is. It's reading and it's writing papers.
Reading and writing papers. Yeah.
So in terms of like, what kind of problems do you want to solve? I think a master's in education is one of the most useful degrees I ever got. I'll tell you that. I think the CNL is kind of an interesting master's degree. It's a clinical nurse leader degree. And it's what used to be like the assistant manager job, right? It's like the idea is you'll be there Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, overseeing all the care, like managing stuff. Like that's what nurse manager, that's what the assistant manager used to do. Yeah. But that seems to be like a generic master's degree. I don't know how useful it is, to be honest, to do stuff like it. I don't know that there are any outcomes around that. Like, I think that's the thing that I think about as a researcher is like, what are the benefits of this degree, not just to you who are now, $60,000 in debt, but like, what's the benefit to your patients and your work?
And I guess I always seen the CNL and I have limited experience with it. I know the VA really kind of doubled down on CNL.
Yeah, we have a lot of them on the East Coast, I gotta say.
Yeah, they're really pushing, the VA was really pushing it as a option. Mm-hmm. And what it seemed to me is it seemed to be kind of almost like system education, system problem solving, system. Like
almost like a CNS.
Yeah.
Almost like a clinical nurse specialist, but not really.
Yeah. And it wasn't, they were still trying to figure out what exactly the role was going to be.
Exactly. Like they're coming up with these degrees without really really defining what this role is.
Yeah.
And that's problematic for the nurse who's like, well, I want to go to graduate school, but what do I do? Right? Like the programs don't even know what they're supposed to end up doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a couple CNLs out there that at some point one just offered themselves as being available for that conversation. And I was like, sure, let's have the conversation because I'd like to know more myself.
Right.
Just to find out a little bit more about what what she sees as their role. Mm-hmm. But it's one of those things that not everybody uses them. Like there are some hospitals that use them. Certainly out west here, not as many. Mm-hmm. But there's still probably a few out there.
Yeah, a lot of nurse managers out here on the East Coast have CNL degrees. It's sort of a generic like management type degree. And I think if you don't want to be like, so do you want to be a manager, right? Like, I don't know. Some people really like being a manager. I don't find that really interesting or pleasant.
I really enjoyed leadership. I thought leadership was tough. It was a hard job, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot, there's a lot of things operationally I really enjoyed. But it's, it has, I think one of those ones, it's one of those ones that it is a high stress job. It is a probably limited, lifespan, I think, for a lot of folks.
Right.
So yeah, I think a lot of people feel like it's a fairly viable option.
Sure. I mean, it's pretty generic. It's totally doable. There are a lot of programs out there. It can get you, certainly, if you want to do management, that's probably really valuable, right? Because it teaches us some stuff about that. And then people who look at like, I want a doctoral degree, right? So again, the DNP versus the PhD. And so I think that the PhD, and I have a PhD, is really, it's a research degree. And so if you don't want to do research, then you shouldn't get a PhD, right? Like that's sort of the bottom line. The job, like literally the job of the PhD is to create knowledge. So PhDs are researchers. They are academics. They are the people who kind of like generate the knowledge, right? Generate the evidence. Whereas the DNPs ideally are the people who translate that into practice, right? Those are the people who take the research that the PhDs generate and they say, okay, here's how we translate into policy and procedure and process and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I think of when I think of like DNP. I think kind of like process and system kind of.
Yeah, it's implementation.
Stuff.
It's, figuring, like looking at clinical problems, getting evidence, grading and leveling the evidence, understanding what the appropriate recommendations are, and then implementing that and evaluating it. That's really what DNPs are ideally supposed to be doing. So DNPs, like given their job, should be in hospital systems.
Yeah.
Right? They should be, in charge of quality. Like that's what DNPs should be doing.
Yeah. Not necessarily academic.
Correct.
Okay. Right.
And the difference is that DNP degrees are awarded by a program, right? PhDs are granted by a university. So
what does that mean? What does that mean to me as the person going for that degree?
It means that the standard of the PhD program, or what you have to do to get your PhD, is standardized throughout the university.
Okay.
Right? In other words, if you are at Boston College, in order to earn a PhD, a doctorate of philosophy, you need to do X, Y, and Z. You need to pass your comps. You need to be examined by the faculty, which is like a trip, I'll tell you that. I had my oral exams. Basically I was in a room with Callista Roy, who asked me questions about theory for like an hour.
No pressure.
So
no pressure.
It was transcendent. It was an amazing experience. Callista Roy is a trip. That's all I can say.
And what made you decide that you wanted to get a PhD? How did you come to that conclusion?
So it's kind of an interesting thing. The way I got to a PhD into Boston College, I got my master's in nursing education and then moved back up to the area where I went to college and started teaching at the university. And, in my interview, they were like, so we would like you to get a PhD within 5 years. And I was like, yeah, no problem. And because I figured, I can do it right here because you guys have a PhD program, right? I wouldn't have to go anywhere. So I go to talk to my dean, who's actually maybe still at UT San Antonio, Eileen Breslin. And she was like, oh no, you can't do your PhD here. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? She goes, no, then if the faculty goes to this program, then we have no diversity of thought. Like you need to go out there and then find that way of thinking and bring it back here. So one of the faculty was a BC alum, and she goes, oh no, you have to go to BC and study with Callista Roy and Dottie Jones. And I was like, okay, fine. Okay, I'll do that. So I got in and that's what I did. So it was like a really great sort of happenstance kind of thing. But what was important for me, because I was a full-time faculty member at the state university, the brick and mortar option was really important for me because I got to get in my car and drive to Boston and be a student, which was really important. And I don't think I really had thought about that before I did it, right? So to be a faculty member in a PhD program at your own school is a terrible idea, partly because there's a huge power gradient, right? Like, who wants your colleagues in charge of your grades?
I got to tell you, so when I did my ADN program, I was faculty at the community college where I did my ADN. I was EMS faculty.
You were doing EMS, right?
Yeah, and my office was literally right next door to my instructor's office, which was terribly awkward. More for them than me, but certainly, it'd be kind of weird when during break I'd be going in my office and sitting down and eating, and they're like go into their office to talk shit about the students, and sure enough, there's one of the students sitting next to them. That made it. I would always see the eyes peeking around here, and the door closing really softly and really quietly, and then I'd get up and really softly and really quietly close my door too.
Yeah. What was super important to me was that, like, I wanted the freedom to be wrong, right? And I felt like if I were just because you have to be wrong at some point, like gloriously, fabulously wrong, completely wrong. And to do that in front of your colleagues or your students, I think is really hard. It doesn't allow you like the full opportunity of being in a student position, right? And I think that's also the really hard part for a lot of nurses, right? If you've been a nurse for 10 years and you're going back to school and you have people telling you how to be a nurse, right? That can be really challenging to kind of let that go a little bit. Like when you're a student, you stop being an expert a little bit, right? Like certainly you have opinions and informed opinions and ways of thinking about things. But the whole point of further education is to show you different structures and different ways of thinking and different ways of understanding how and what you're thinking. And that honestly makes you a better clinician. It really does. Like, it makes you consider a lot of different things that you don't consider if this is if you assume that you know everything.
Yeah.
So for me, like going to this program at BC, it was like getting up on a ladder and kind of seeing all the things, like all the stuff. Like I went in with this really great, like neat little study about triage, and I walked out with a theory. Like my advisor, Dottie Jones, would say, like, the problem is always bigger than you think. And I was like, you're totally, at the end, they were like, totally right. And I think that's an important thing to think about. Like, what you see in your ER, wherever you are, the problem is bigger. It's more universal. It's systemic. It's not just you. And I think learning new ways about acquiring, processing, synthesizing information makes you see that, right? It allows you to look at the systems in which you function and understand how to affect change, right? Yeah. Because it's not just you. It is, you are part of a system, and the system is the thing that is kind of keeping you down, right? It's not you. You can't throw a lavender bath bomb at this, right?
You can't. That work for everything.
No. Code lavenders don't work in systemic problems.
That's awesome. One of the things I've done in the past, and typically when people come to me and ask for advice, and they say, "Hey, where do I start? What do I want to do?" And a lot of times it's people who already have their master's degree and they're kind of going, "Do I want to get a doctorate degree?" And I usually like go talk to Lisa and
talk to Lisa.
I talk to Lisa. She'll kind of get you, talk to you a little bit and help you kind of see this thought process. And I appreciate that. Now, one of the things I found, and I think that one of the questions that I think people often have is when they're going to that, so a bachelor's degree is a bachelor's degree. Like a bachelor's in nursing is a bachelor's in nursing. For the most part, they're all pretty close to the same. But when you get to the master's, that's where you really start to see the differentiation. And for me, the three kind of paths that were available in my area was you can either be do a leadership focus, an education focus, or you did the clinical focus and did like the NP. And that was kind of the first where I had to really say, and one of the things I had to ask too, when I went for my master's degree, I had to the first question I had was, do I do an MBA or an MSN? So let's And one of the things I found when I looked at my master's degrees, I found that like it was either the choices kind of were either clinical or it was non-clinical.
Mm-hmm.
So either you were doing the practitioner role in that piece, or you were doing either leadership or education, or the two big ones. Informatics has certainly grown, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But those were the two big ones is the leadership or education. And the reality is that for the most part, those two degrees are fairly interchangeable. Like a lot of times hospitals don't look at what your degree is in, but that you have a master's degree.
Right. So in the sense that like, oh, I need and this is the big difference, I think. Are you going back to school to get a degree, just to have a degree so that you get more money, or you don't have to work weekends, or you don't have to work nights, right?
Valid reasons.
Those are valid reasons. But if that's the only reason, it's going to be a miserable 2 years, right? Yeah. And a lot of money.
Yeah.
A lot of money for some of these degrees. Like, so, what I tell people really is like, again, be really clear on what you want to do first. And then understand what degree gives you the tools to do that.
Yeah.
Right. So if you want to teach, that's obvious. If you want to be management, you've got a couple of options. If you want to solve systematic problems, you get a clinical nurse specialist degree. If master's degree in a clinical nurse specialist credential.
Yeah.
If you want to do advanced clinical practice, then you get to be a CNRA or an NP or a midwife, right? Like all of those things. So you really want to have a very clear sense of, like you said, where do you want to be? What kind of problems do you want to solve before you start school? Like the idea that, any master's will do, that's a very expensive generality.
Yeah.
Right. And also, again, if you hate reading papers and writing papers, you're going to hate grad school.
Yeah.
You're going to hate every minute of it. And here's the thing, so this was the unbelievable conversation I had this weekend that set me off. Like, this is why I emailed you. I'm like, hey, we need to talk about this. Is I was talking to some nurses in the ER where I work. And one of them said, oh, I'm in graduate school. I'm in an NP program, but I don't get to do my clinicals for a year. So I'm front loading all the garbage courses. And I was like, really? She's like, garbage courses. Like that evidence-based practice course. Like what, how useless is that? And I was like, I need to go into the bathroom and put pencils in my eyes right now. You're like,
wait, do you know who I am?
Do you ever
want to be like, wait, do you know who I am? Do you have any idea who you're talking to?
No. That was hilarious.
I remember asking Jean Preo that once when Jean Preo had the procedure book of emergency nursing, and she was telling me she was working like part-time in an ER somewhere. And I go, do they have any idea? And they're like, she's like, no.
She works at Dartmouth Hitchcock, I think. I'm pretty sure they know who she is up there.
Well, the place where she was like, well, yeah. She goes, no. She goes, not all. She's like, most, but not all. And I was like, can you imagine?
Right. Well, they're like, oh, well, why don't you work more? I was like, well, I kind of have a full-time job.
Like, hey, we like you. Why don't you stay around a little while?
Right, exactly. Like, hey, you're kind of fun. Why don't you work more? It's like, I got other stuff that I'm doing. So
I'm waiting for someone to come and say, hey, have you ever thought about joining the ENA? And you're like,
maybe. Good thought. Yeah. Good thought. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest thing is that to understand that like all these courses that people think are just like, I think it's really the fault of the programs, to be honest with you, especially DNP programs, because they present this to people as, we'll get you through this program in 3 years, right?
So you can do what you want.
Right, dude, check. Like these are all check boxes, but the problem is that when the students think these courses are check boxes, then they're missing the whole point of the education, right? Right? Like, what do you mean I have to take classes in things, right? Like, I just want to be a better clinician. It's like, I remember one undergraduate student said to me, this is years ago, I was teaching patho. She's like, when do we get through this stupid stuff and get to the nursing part? I'm like, this is the nursing part. This is the nursing part. And by the way, I don't have a lot of confidence in your ability to do this work, but we'll see how it goes. You're 18. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think the DNP programs don't do a good job of really clarifying what the role is, what the education, how the education informs and supports the role. I think people really just look at it as like, this is stuff I have to get through to get to the good part, right? Oh. And I think that's a problem. I think nurses in general, and especially emergency nurses, right? Like we have the attention spans of goldfish for the most part. And right. It's the ADHD crowd. But there's a point at which you kind of have to dig into some stuff to get better at what you do.
True.
Right?
True. Absolutely.
But there's no reason that you have to. I guess what I want to say is there's graduate school for its own sake is not necessary, right? Like it doesn't make you a better nurse unless you're like invested in what you're learning.
Good point.
Does that make sense?
Good point.
Yeah.
Now, what about, so one of the questions that I had when I was looking at graduate programs, I really had to kind of weigh the options of MBA versus MSN. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what
MBA versus MSN? Wow. Like I think I have some pre-existing issues around that because I really resist the idea of healthcare as a business. But I know it is, right? But those people, I don't know. I don't know if you should have an MBA to be a nurse. Like, I mean, you can clearly, and I think that may be really useful in understanding systems and setting up, like, how do we set up a system that keeps the lights on, like makes enough money to keep the lights on, but also maintains patient safety?
Yeah.
I kind of get the feeling, I don't know a lot about MBAs, to be honest with you. Those seem like things that other people get. But I know a lot of nurses who have them.
Yeah, no. And what I'll tell you so I started doing my kind of exploration when I was, finishing up my bachelor's degree. I was almost done. I was thinking to myself that I was probably going to go for a master's, and really was kind of weighing, do I want to get an MBA versus do I want to get an MSN? And
why were you thinking about an MBA?
Those were the two master's degrees. And those were the degrees I was seeing for people that were in like leadership positions. I was kind of thinking I was going to go for the leadership route. And certainly not the education. I didn't think I was going to do the education route.
Right.
I thought I was going to do the leadership route. And so I looked at the options of being either the MBA or the MSN in leadership. And I remember talking to people, and I talked to what at the time were two of the smartest nurse leaders that I had access to. And one, was an MBA. He was I think he was like an assistant CNO at the time. He was MSN. I'm sorry, he was an MSN. And he, at his level he goes for the CNO level, he goes, I really wish I had my MBA. Like the MBA would make
sure. Well, that makes sense.
A lot more sense. Kind of running the business piece. He goes, he's like, some of my colleagues are way ahead of me, like on business. He goes, I can keep up, but not, not without some struggles. And, then another nurse leader I talked to who was an MSN who was also an MSN, but was getting his MBA, was like, he's like, well, the MBA is nice. And, it depends on what you want to do with it. Like if you want to be the CEO, he goes, the CEO is going to have an MBA. Mm-hmm. He's like, but he goes, nursing is really focusing on the MSN. And most magnet facilities really want to see MSNs in leadership positions.
Right.
So he's like, yeah, you may want to do MSN.
Interesting. Because I can see if you want to be, when you grow up, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? If you want to be a CNO or run a hospital system, like, yeah, you should totally have an MBA.
MBAs, yeah, good way to go. Good way to go.
Yeah, totally. But if you're focused more on students or patients or educating nurses, then an MSN seems like a much.
Or even I think just like unit leadership. I think unit leadership, MBA really, or I'm sorry, MSN really lends itself well to that.
Sure.
I think, in my opinion.
No, I don't disagree with you at all. Like,
so I have one of the folks I work with is she's done ADN, BSN. I believe I don't remember if she has a PhD or a DNP. She has a doctorate degree in nursing, and now she's going back now for an MBA. And I remember asking her, why? You already have a doctorate. You already have the terminal degree in nursing, as high as it's going to go. Why do the MBA? And she, then her thought process was, if I want to be a CNO at some point, then I got to have that business sense.
Right. Absolutely. But that's a great example of like, I know I want to be there. This is the education I need to prepare me to do that job well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I think that's a really great way of thinking about it. Right. If I want to be there, what do I need to know how to do? What kind of degree gets me that information so I can do that?
I took to Facebook, the almighty Facebook, and asked a couple questions. And I asked the questions of, I said, I'm going to do a podcast talking about going back to school. Should you? What degree? What will it be like? What kind of questions do you have? And one of the questions, DNP versus PhD. And again, you already mentioned, what problems do you want to solve?
Right. Do you want to create knowledge? Right. Do you want to do research like all the time? Like me? I love that. Or do you want to take that information and translate it into practice? So if you want to do research, you need a PhD, right? The PhD education is the education that gives you the tools to do that really well. And here's another thing that I would say about the PhD. People talk about like postdocs and stuff like that. In my mind, if you've gone to a good PhD program with good training, you know how to do your job. Like you shouldn't come out of a PhD program and need further training for 2 years at like poverty wages, right? Yeah. So when you pick a PhD program, you want to pick one and ask, what are the graduates doing? Like, where are those people? Are they professors? Are they researchers with organizations, right? Are there jobs? People are like, I don't want to work in a university. Well, I don't work in a university, right? There's jobs out there with nonprofits and NGOs and corporations and like all kinds of things that allow people with good research skills to do good work, right? So there's a lot of options with a PhD. And DNP tends to be more like boots on the ground, translational stuff. If you don't like doing research, creating knowledge, be a DNP, right? If you're like, oh, well, I just love solving clinical problems by using evidence, right, that somebody else has created, DNP, way to go.
Next question. All right, you decide you're going to go to a doctorate program. So I have myself have been looking at DNP programs, just kind of kicking around the idea. Don't tell my wife that.
Sure.
The school you go to matter. So I know folks who've graduated from very prestigious schools, and I know people who have gotten their doctorate degree from, I'm going to just make up
Cracker Jack box. What?
No, not Cracker Jack box. I mean, good. All accredited schools, of course, is sure. The bottom line is it an accredited school? If the answer is yes, then your DNP is as DNP as every other DNP, right?
Right.
But how big a difference is it going to make if I have a DNP from Harvard versus have a DNP from UT Texas?
Yeah, actually, it's not even a good comparison because the UT schools are actually really good. Right. So here's the thing that you need to think about when you're looking at a graduate program, right? Unless you are a 25-year-old single childless person, right? You've got considerations. You may have a spouse. You may have kids. You may have a job. And so that puts some parameters around what kind of school you're looking at, right? It's not like when we're 18, we're like, oh, I want to go to that school 1,000 miles away. Great. I'll get on a plane or get in my car and drive there, right? Without worrying. So it's kind of like, what is close by? Are you a brick and mortar person, right? Like, do you want to be in a classroom with other people? And for me, I have found that I need that like delineated space and time to get in my car and go to a place and be a student and then go back and do the other things that I do. The socialization that takes place in a classroom, I think it has advantages. But if you are in the middle of Montana and the closest place is 500 miles away, then you may want to look at an online program. And so what I would suggest for anybody looking at any type of graduate program, especially a DNP, is ask the school what their graduates are doing, right? And are those people in jobs like jobs that you want, right? Are those people working as in systems? Are they working in independent practice? Are they running a midwifery practice, right? Like, what are your graduates doing right now? And if they're doing stuff you want to do, then that's probably an adequate program for you to go to.
Nice.
I would say there's a little bit of difference with PhD programs in that I talk to in my job, I talk to a lot of people who have really uneven training in how to conduct research. And I think in that case, if you're looking at a PhD program, like if you really want to be a researcher, then it really behooves you to find the best program you can get to. I think I am philosophically opposed to entirely online PhD programs because there's a socialization process and a discussion process that is not fully realized on Zoom or on, whatever. But we do the best that we can, right? So if you can't get to Boston College or University of Pennsylvania because you're somewhere else, then what's the best program that you can participate in, right? And how do you know a program is good? Look at what the alumni are doing, right? Like go to the webpage, call up the graduate office and say, what are your PhD graduates doing? Are they professors? Are they researchers? Are they policymakers, right? Or how many of your graduates are in the American Academy of Nursing? How many of your graduates are in the Academy of Emergency Nursing, right? Like, what are these people doing? Like, what kind of training are they getting? I really think that a PhD should never be a checkbox degree. And neither should a DNP.
Both of them are just way too much work and way too much money and work and effort for it to be just a box to check. I believe. It's so much work. It's so much thinking. It's so much investment, right? It should be, right? Like you should never be sitting there like glazed over in a doctoral program. Yeah. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it, right?
Right, exactly. And only 1% of nurses have doctoral degrees. So
yeah, that's interesting. Let's see. What are some of the other questions here? I think we may have already covered this question already, but there's one question that basically said, what are options for grad schools other than NP, something that pays better than regular staff nursing jobs? And I think, the answer is, you can get into education, you can get into leadership, right?
Yeah, well, that's the crazy thing because NPs don't actually pay better than staff nurses.
Well,
because you're salaried and you're paid less than physicians. So most people... And also, this is a big problem right now. There is a huge nursing shortage, nursing professor shortage. Nursing schools are turning away about 80,000 qualified students a year because they don't have enough faculty. And the problem is that as faculty, you make about half of what you would make as a staff nurse with 10 years of experience.
Okay. Let's talk about that because that's a little bit of a problem.
That's a huge problem.
I was very lucky. So my master's degree, for full disclosure, my master's degree is in leadership and management because that was the path that I was going to go. Now, with that said, I'm working in an education role. So I work in an education role, and the reality is unless you're talking practitioner, I think that the informatics is one of the degrees that was newer that may have been something I would have been interested in if it was available when I went. But the master's degree in leadership focus and education focus, those are kind of the two big ones. And there's others, but those were the two big ones. And then informatics really started getting kind of bigger. But the reality is, so my degree is in leadership management, yet I hold a education position, and then I'm a part-time faculty at a college just based on the fact that I have my MSN. Like it's for that level, an MSN's an MSN. And it doesn't, it's kind of generic. It doesn't really matter a whole bunch.
Although I would argue that a master's in nursing education is more useful for teaching than a generic master's in nursing.
Probably true. Almost assuredly true. Just like, a master's in leadership might be better for someone who wants to be a director,
a manager, right?
But both, you can do both. You can do either with either of those degrees. So, so that, to me, like I don't see that as much of a thing. But then what I'll tell you is, I remember just getting my master's degree. I was getting ready to finish my master's degree with, again, leadership and management. And I got a call from my community college where I went to school and where I was still part-time faculty. And they're like, hey, we'll pick you up as nursing faculty today. Like, they're like, we don't pick up brand new grads for faculty.
Right.
We'll pick you up because we know you, we like you, we'll take you. One, I was completely honored, but then when we got to talking, I realized like it made less than I was making without my master's at the time.
Right.
Which is much less than I make now.
Right. Oh, absolutely. As an assistant professor, I made probably $30,000 less than I would have made as a staff nurse.
Yeah.
Right. And this is a huge problem for both faculty and also nurse practitioners who are salaried. And so if you're seeing, my sister's a nurse practitioner and she's like, this is ridiculous. I think she was really shocked because you end up working, extended hours, obviously, because you have to do all your charting and you have to see, 20 patients a day or whatever. And it works out to some ridiculous hourly wage. So, you really want to think, why do you want to go to grad school?
Yeah.
Right. If it's for the money, unfortunately, this is not until we fix that. You're not going to make more. The one thing that I did really like about being an educator, like a in-hospital educator, was that if I didn't want to, I didn't have to work nights or weekends. I chose to do that because that's where the new nurses got dumped, was on nights and weekends, and they needed the most help. So I ended up doing more hours in that way. But certainly the idea is like, well, I'm an educator. I work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And so that may be enough of a reward within the hospital system.
Yeah. I remember my last leadership position, like my last significant leadership position. I remember sitting at home one night. It was 1:00 in the morning and I was sitting in my living room while my wife was in bed, sick, by the way, and ended up, going to the hospital the next morning. And I remember at 1:00 in the morning, sitting in the living room with my computer open, trying to troubleshoot the system that had, my staff had called to tell me it had crashed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I remember thinking to myself, like, this is crazy. And, when I looked at how many hours I was putting in, I was making good money, but I was making more than most nurse practitioners I know. But when you looked at hourly, my wife was like, you probably make minimum wage.
Right.
And I was like, and she wasn't wrong. I was, I certainly, if you looked at my salary sounded good. But when you looked at how much I worked, maybe not as much. And as a nurse leader, that certainly is a piece that it's something you got to consider. I was recently asked if I wanted to apply for a leadership position at an organization. And I got to thinking, I kind of kicked it around. So yeah, maybe. Mm-hmm. And I got to thinking there's no education emergencies where they're going to call me at 9:00 at night and ask me to come in, or 9:00 at night and ask me to get on the computer and check for something like that. It's just there's not those emergencies.
Right. There's no such thing as a research emergency. I am
firmly. No one's looking for you at 9:00 at night for work.
Every once in a while, somebody's like, I need you to weigh in on this. And I'm like, yeah, that can wait till the morning. There's no research emergency. Stop it.
Yeah. So, that's certainly one thing I've considered. To me, the practitioner route never seemed like the thing that I wanted to do.
I think I never wanted to do that because at the time that I was like, that would be a thing that I would do. It was all primary care.
Yeah. And it's not now.
I don't like sore throats. I don't find that particularly interesting,
Yeah.
It's a little different now. I think if I were to go back to get an NP degree, I would go into midwifery. I would go into women's health. I wouldn't do it in emergency care.
Yeah.
I think my skills are better used elsewhere. But yeah, that's something really to think about is if you think if you look at your education, the money you're going to pay for your education as an investment that you'll get, it's like renovating your kitchen, right? You're not going to get that money back. So
you got to really want to do it.
Yeah. So you have to really want to do it. Right. It won't give you more money. In fact, this is the crazy thing is staff nurses in terms of clear boundaries around their work and their time and their payment for what they do. Staff nurses actually get paid the best of any of us.
Yeah, it's clean.
Right.
It's clean. You go in, you do your 3 12-hour shifts, maybe more.
And you're done.
That's it. You're done. No one's looking for you when you go home. I found the one leadership position I found that was really like that was when I was working as a house supervisor.
Mm-hmm. I loved working as a supervisor.
I was the boss when I was there. I was the person in charge. And when I was there, I was the only one there at night. And I got to make the decisions, make the calls, good ones and the bad ones. And then at the end of the day, I went home, went to bed. Nobody was looking for me.
Right.
So.
Right. Absolutely.
So one of the questions, and we probably won't put this on the podcast, but one of the questions, and I won't tell you who said it because you know him. Affordable DNP, no BS, just get it done.
No such thing.
I was like, well, all right.
There's no such thing. The thing is that PhDs are funded.
Oh, no, DNP. It was DNP.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
PhDs are funded because there's university funding.
Gotcha.
Right? So my PhD at Boston College was free.
Really?
It was free. I got full tuition. I got a stipend. And I got actually a Jonas scholarship and an ENA scholarship. So it cost me this much to get a PhD.
There's a young lady following in your footsteps who has a Jonas scholarship and an ENA scholarship who thinks they're a hero. Super
handy. Super handy at that point. But the DNPs are run by schools of nursing. And actually DNPs go through continuing education. And so there's no scholarship from like the university. There's no fellowship. Like the DNP programs fund all the other programs in a school of nursing.
That's a good point.
Anything that goes through continuing education is like the gravy train for the college or the university.
Yeah.
Because they're not, there's no financial aid. There's, it's just money. So you really want to think about that. And again, the idea of like, to me, when people are like, oh, I want an affordable, quick DNP, what that means is I want to just pay my money and get my degree. I don't want to actually learn anything. I just want the degree.
It doesn't really work that way, does it?
That's a problem.
Yeah. Let's see. So there's a question here that I think we kind of already asked, but her question was, I'm not a Yale or Hopkins kind of candidate. How does UT hold up on the job market or other schools like a WGU or Chamberlain or one of those?
I would go to UT over Chamberlain or WGU.
Okay.
Because I think that there's a track record from a school like UT, like it exists in the real world. This is just me personally, right? It exists in the real world. You can call them up. You can talk to people. You can go there, right? And generally, I think state systems do a pretty good job. I think the UC system, the UMass system, the UT system, they all produce, like they have a long tradition of nursing programs with good clinicians. They have good relationships with the hospitals in the area. Like, I think that's actually a very good choice.
All right.
And I think, honestly, that, and this may have changed, but my initial impression of schools like Yale and like Mass General, like School of Health Professions and stuff, back in the day when I was applying to those schools, like I had friends who went to them and they were terrible clinicians. Like they didn't get any clinical. It was all about the reputation of the school and less about the patient.
That, certainly when I did my associate's degree, kind of the kind of running thing was there was an associate's degree at community college that I went to, and then there was a university that also had a nursing entry level program. Mm-hmm. And the kind of word on the street from the folks in the hospitals were, wow, we really like the community college students because they get more clinical, they spend more time here. Or the university students are already kind of thinking like, how am I going to get to the next level?
Right.
With spending as little time on the floor as possible.
Right.
And not that was every student that did a bachelor's program.
No, but if that's kind of the general attitude that the faculty put forward, like, oh, well, you're going to have a BSN, so you're going to be a leader, right? Yeah. If you can't be a leader if you can't do the job, right? And that's what I tell my students. I'm like, don't get your panties all in a knot here about being a nurse practitioner or being a leader. You're a leader by doing the job well. You're a leader because you understand what other nurses are doing and appreciate that and can facilitate that. That's what a leader is. It's not someone who has just separated themselves from the bedside.
Absolutely. That reminds me, I'm going to do a podcast on like nursing leadership, what it means to be a nursing leader.
Yeah. I'm not your girl there though.
No, we got plenty of folks.
You got plenty of people who are way better at that.
Plenty of folks. Dr. Wolf, as always, this was fantastic. Lots of fun to talk to you about this kind of stuff. And man, it's been a while since we've done this. We need to do it again.
Yeah. So super cool. Like, I think that there's so much emphasis on education and so little information out there about like, what does that really mean to you? Like, what does it look like? What are the things you need to do that, I think it's important to get that information out there.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks for your time. That was awesome.
Yeah, cool. Hey, no problem.